Here, we will see a few firsts today, including an official state dinner for the royals after a major moment later on when the king will deliver remarks to a joint session of Congress. But before all that, the American version of a royal welcome on the South Lawn, which is where we find our Garrett Haake. And Garrett, plenty of pomp and pageantry to start the day, but there will be a little bit of politics for the king, too.
Yeah, it's a healthy mix in what will be a long day for the king and queen today in Washington. Hallie, we're expecting this arrival to begin shortly, where the king will be greeted by hundreds of members of the honor guard representing every branch of the U.S. Armed Service. You can hear some of the bands playing behind me. They've been out here for some time under suitably British skies, a gray sky, cold, rainy day. After this greeting, the president and the king will meet privately. The first lady and the queen will host an event with children here at the White House. Then it's up Pennsylvania Avenue for a meeting with a bipartisan group of lawmakers, and the king's speech to Congress expected to be heavy on emphasizing the special nature of that special relationship between the two countries. Then, of course, we're back here to the White House for the state dinner tonight. The president looking forward to all of it. He's long been a fan of the royal family and of King Charles specifically. Again, a lengthy day, which the politics won't be front of mind, but will always be the background and the context for what we're seeing tonight.
The monarch's mission, if you will, Garrett, is to really highlight the so-called special relationship between the U.S. and the U.K., even at a moment of tensions between the two nations, particularly over the war against Iran. The king has his own special relationship, a friendship with President Trump, a relationship that really doesn't extend between the president and the prime minister in Britain. So for the king, it's a moment to really remind President Trump about that long-standing alliance.
Yeah, that's right. A relationship, or an alliance, rather, that's been strained not just by the war in Iran, but by the president's views on NATO, by the conflict, the verbal conflict, I should specify, over Greenland, over trade. So many transatlantic issues that have come up in this president's second term. But the relationship with the king specifically goes back far longer than that. And I think it's on that relationship that the king is hoping to rebuild some of the relationship between the two countries. You'll see that personal friendship, as the president would describe it, on full display today.
Garrett Haake live for us there on the South Lawn. A bit of a gloomy day, as Garrett notes, rather British, if you will. We expect to see the king, Queen Camilla, the First Lady, the President, for what will be a series of events meant to welcome them officially here to the United States ahead of that state dinner later on. Our NBC News royal contributor Emily Nash is at the ceremony today. And Emily, you've seen this in London, you've seen this in the UK, you're now experiencing this in Washington. There will be an historic first with the pass and review, as it's called, later on.
Yeah, it's quite a spectacle, I can tell you. And, you know, we like to think in Britain we do pomp and pageantry especially well. But, you know, President Trump's really laying this on for the King and Queen today. It's fantastic. You know, he's even laid on the British weather.
Emily, with one of the best seats in the House, I think, next to Garrett Haake, as we are watching now, top Trump administration officials come filing in, members of his cabinet, his chief of staff, many others as well, taking their seats in the first couple of rows for the events to begin. Umbrellas in hand, we should note. I want to bring in Monica Alba, who's joining us as well. And Mon, it would be remiss not to talk about the optics here. President Trump, throughout the course of his terms, when he has traveled, especially overseas to Europe, has made note of moments like these, moments where there is a ceremony, where there is military might, where there is sort of a presentation of the colors. Frankly, he likes to see it.
Absolutely, Hallie. This kind of display is something he does always note and appreciate when he's overseas, and he certainly wanted to extend the same when he welcomed King Charles and Queen Camilla yesterday when they first came to the White House to have tea with the president and the First Lady, and to also visit the new beehive that the First Lady installed on the South Lawn a short time ago. The president, the First Lady, the King and Queen even getting quite close to the bees themselves. The president holding one of them, the pair laughing. It appeared that the First Lady was making some comments that King Charles thoroughly enjoyed before they went over to the British ambassador's residence for a garden party where they also interacted with a lot of different officials and journalists and continued that first part of their visit before starting these more formal ceremonies that you're going to see today. But in terms of the preparations, Hallie, and just to pull back the curtain a little bit, the president really wanted specific aspects of renovations that he is overseeing here at the White House to be finished and ready for the king's visit. In particular, he has redone the West Wing colonnade, which is going to be a path that the king and queen will walk along when they are heading to various parts of the White House. Specifically, the king and the president will be meeting and will see the Oval Office. And that pathway, which had been there for centuries with old Tennessee flagstone pavers, has now been replaced with some black granite specifically chosen by the president. And that project was accelerated over the last couple of weeks and wrapped up essentially yesterday, and this morning they put the finishing touches on it. So just to give you a sense of how the president wanted to be ready to show off the White House for this very formal event.
Very formal indeed, as we are seeing now members of the British staff come filing into the South Lawn here. I think we still have Garrett Haake with us. Garrett, I know you'll have to go once the king and queen arrive, but give us a sense of what it's like where you are, particularly in this moment where you do have the king preparing for what is going to be a big day for him here in Washington before he heads to New York tomorrow. He's got, obviously, the joint address to Congress, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then that lavish state dinner later on tonight.
Yeah, Hallie, I will say I don't know who's in charge of the weather out here, but the rain did seem to stop just as the British delegation was arriving. A good sign for what I'm looking at a crowd of several hundred people who've gathered here on the South Lawn for a bit of pomp and pageantry that we just don't typically see here at the White House. I mean, this is by far the biggest ceremony we've seen this White House put on for any head of state or any other visitor, at least in this Trump second term. This is old hat, of course, for the king, who spent his whole life basically traveling around the globe and being treated in this manner. But as Monica was laying out, this is something that's very important to President Trump to roll out the red carpet in this way, make his guest feel at home. On the construction front, I don't know if it's fully visible in our shot, but the cranes that are building the ballroom that the president is so fond of are working hard to complete that project, even as we're getting ready for the king to arrive. It's sort of a bit of notable context here as the president's been talking about that. And then, again, to the politics of it all. These two, as political figures, couldn't be more different. King Charles, as most British monarchs, known for a bit of subtlety and understatement. Those are not words often ascribed to President Trump and his political style. And so the different elements of the politics today will be fascinating, both on the substance and on those stylistic elements today, I think, Hallie.
It's an interesting note on the crane there, Garrett. From your vantage point, we were able to just see a view. The president obviously knows that this ballroom he feels is very important to him. It is something that he talks about at every turn. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear more about it today, as we are seeing now the continuation of this arrival ceremony. We haven't seen the king or queen yet, nor the president or first lady. We expect that just moments from now. I want to quickly bring in our Ryan Nobles, because Ryan, where you are on Capitol Hill, we expect to see the king later on. And his speech, we know, is going to be a reaffirmation of the friendship and the alliance between the U.S. and the U.K., despite disagreements. And at this current moment, there certainly are those.
Yeah, there's no doubt, Hallie. I think that we're going to hear this king remind members of Congress about that special relationship that exists between the United Kingdom and the United States, especially during this moment of tumult around the world. The threats to Europe, the threats to the Western world, the encroachment by Russia in Ukraine, the situation with Iran. These are all things that serve as a backdrop to this reminder that the king is expected to give the members of Congress. And this, by any circumstance, is a historic address by King Charles. He actually addressed this body as Prince of Wales back in 1970. His mother addressed Congress on 2 different occasions, but it'll be the first time that we hear from a British monarch in the House chamber since 1991. That was when his mother, Queen Elizabeth, delivered remarks to Congress. So this is significant, and it's something that the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, is particularly interested. He was part of the reason that this address came to be, the reason that King Charles would be given this speech. The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, actually addressed the British Parliament a few months ago. He was the first American House Speaker to have that honor, something that he is particularly proud of and something that he brings up on a regular basis. So this is going to be a big moment here on Capitol Hill, and it will also be, Hallie, one of the few times that we'll likely see a relatively unified Congress. The last few State of the Unions that have happened here, whether it be from President Trump or President Biden, have been largely divided, where half the chamber is sitting on their hands during the speech, while the other half of the chamber seems to be standing and applauding the entire time. We expect both Republicans and Democrats to greet King Charles warmly. We expect them to respond to his reminders of that special relationship between the two sides and emphasize that is something that the Congress would like to see continue on into the foreseeable future. So it'll be a much different mood than what we've seen with prior States of the Union, where we're going to see both sides come together to welcome King Charles. But I have to tell you, too, Hallie, this place is buzzing. There are so many people all around the Capitol anticipating this move. I've had staffers text me to ask me when and where they might be able to catch a glimpse of King Charles. It is such a unique opportunity to have something like this happen on Capitol Hill, and you can tell the energy that exists on Capitol Hill right now as a result.
Brian, thank you. Garrett Haake, let me go back to you because you make the good point that this is, to a degree, par for the course overseas in London, in the UK. Far less so here in Washington, particularly at the White House. And it is clear that President Trump and the First Lady wanted to make this feel special for the King and Queen, and that they have put in place some historic firsts, things that we have not seen before, like what's coming up just moments from now, that pass in review, which will be the first time that we will see all 6 service branches, including for the first time the Space Force, participate.
Yeah, that's right. They'll have hundreds of members of these different military branches, some of which have gathered just behind me, Hallie. In fact, if you look over my left shoulder, you'll see those members of the Space Force who are gathered here today. The first time we've seen them as part of this full-scale military presentation, if you will. The two leaders will inspect the troops. We'll hear more performance from the President's own Marine Band. And at some point today, and there's been a notice put out to the residents of Washington, D.C., expect to hear it. It may be loud, a military flyover as this ceremony is getting underway. Sometime early in the next hour, Hallie.
We'll be watching that when it happens, as expected. Garrett, thank you. Let me go to Emily now, too, because Emily, given your expertise covering both sides of the pond, so to speak, how do you think this moment is being received by a British audience, given the tensions that we've talked about on a number of issues between these nations?
I think it's a really important moment. It's a huge display of respect, not just for the King, but for the visiting British delegation. And that will go a long way to helping to smooth over the huge cracks that have developed in the relationship in recent months. And it is these big moments of pomp and pageantry and, you know, even the glitzy state dinner that helps to oil the wheels, really, of the soft diplomacy that reminds everyone as well that this is a relationship, you know, between two nations that transcends all of the individuals currently involved. And it's a good reminder to us all that our shared history is worth a lot more than, you know, the current debates and disagreements that are ongoing. And, you know, there's a lot on show here, but that's really what's at the heart of it.
Big message from the King as he is here in the United States. Emily, thanks. Let me go to Danielle Hamamdjian, our London correspondent, who is overseas for us. And Danielle, to this point here, you've got the president who has made very clear how much he likes King Charles. He has repeatedly called him a friend, has said how much he's been looking forward to what we're seeing here at this ceremony at the White House, the events over the course of the next day or so here in Washington. At the same time, the president has very different feelings about the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and has made that clear, especially over the course of the last month related to this war against Iran, saying of Starmer, he is no Winston Churchill. It makes for a split-screen moment here between Washington and London.
You're absolutely right, Hallie. And as royal biographers and insiders have pointed out, it's clear that the U.S. president has one mindset for the British government and another completely different mindset for the British monarchy. This is Britain's soft power at work. It's often said here that the royal family is the British government's secret weapon. They are the ultimate diplomats, and King Charles has had a lifetime of training, meeting his first U.S. president back in 1959 when he was just 10 years old, meeting Dwight Eisenhower. Fast forward 7 decades, and here he is on the most important trip of his reign so far. Now, we should remind the audience that the royal family and the king is above the day-to-day politics. But remember why he is in the United States at this very moment in time. He doesn't get to choose, despite his position, where he goes, when he goes. This is a reflection of the government of the day's priorities. This is what the British government and Keir Starmer wanted. And for a while, we talked at length about this quote-unquote bromance between Starmer and Trump. Well, that is no longer the case. And so, one of the papers here I'm reminded of had a quote by an aide in Downing Street that said that this relationship is only special when the United States wants something. While Donald Trump wanted the UK to get involved in the war in Iran, that didn't happen. And as you mentioned, Hallie, he then proceeded to repeatedly lashing out at Prime Minister Starmer, calling him no Winston Churchill. He mocked the UK military, dismissed British aircraft carriers as toys, that the UK didn't have a navy. He said NATO forces but stayed behind or far away from the front lines in Afghanistan. The UK lost 457 men and women in the war in Afghanistan. And so veterans and the families of those who died there were appalled by those comments. And who is the commander-in-chief of the UK Armed Forces? Well, it is King Charles. So that no doubt hit a nerve when those comments were made by Donald Trump, who then, to be fair, did backtrack. But nonetheless, they did not go down very well here in the UK, Hallie.
Danielle Hamamdjian, thank you. Monica Alba, let me go back to you. And just to reset for our audience here, if you're just joining us, you are watching the official White House arrival ceremony for King Charles and Queen Camilla here on their state visit. Obviously, they got into town yesterday. They had a private tea. There was a garden party at the embassy. But this is the pomp and pageantry that we've expected to see. The red carpet quite literally rolled out over the course of the last day. And here, as you see it. After this, the king is going to be doing some private moments behind closed doors with the president and first lady, a gift exchange, for example, receiving and greeting the staff members who have come to see him. And then he'll head down Pennsylvania Avenue over to the Capitol for what will look a lot like a State of the Union. It'll give that vibe. It will be more of a state of the relationship between the U.S. and the UK as the king addresses lawmakers in both chambers of Congress. And then after that, Monica, the state dinner tonight. While the king has been here many times before, this is his first official state dinner. And the first lady and the president are pulling out all the stops.
They really are, Hallie, and a bit of color on that point in particular. Yesterday, when the president and first lady welcomed them, you could see them kind of pointing over in the direction of where the East Wing once stood and where the president hopes his $400 million ballroom may stand one day, almost as if to indicate this is the construction site, this is the process, and sorry that we couldn't host you there, since that is his hope eventually for the future. But what you don't see on the South Lawn right now, Hallie, is a giant tent, which is how they have done these state banquets in the past. You've seen past administrations try to invite more guests and accommodate more people by doing that, since there isn't a room currently in the White House complex that can accommodate so many who might come to something like a state dinner or a state banquet. So instead, tonight, that is actually going to be held in the East Room. And there was some reporting and commentary about the president specifically saying that he didn't feel like he could host someone like the king out on the grass, out in the South Lawn, where he always talks about women having to trod through the grass in their heels and getting stuck. That is part of the motivation, the president has said, for his ballroom. And it seems like it's something specifically that he will be sharing with King Charles and Queen Camilla throughout the course of today. Hallie.
Monica, thank you. Garrett, we understand that the king has left the Blair House. It is a very quick stroll or ride from there here to the White House, which means things should be beginning any minute.
Yeah, that's right. And we're seeing those preparations, the honor guard here being called to attention, which makes me think, and here's the announcement.
Let's listen in. Garrett, thanks.
To the president and remaining standing for the arrival of their majesties, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, and the playing of the national anthems of the United Kingdom and the United States.
Present, march!
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and First Lady Melania Trump.
The arrival of King Charles, Queen Camilla there alongside President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump. We will await the national anthems for both countries on this historic morning on the White House South Lawn. You can see hundreds of people gathered here for the events of this arrival ceremony before the party moves indoors. We'll keep listening in.
Ladies and gentlemen, the national anthem of the United Kingdom, followed by the national anthem of the United States.
The national anthems for both countries there as the King and President and Queen and First Lady look on. Gabe Gutierrez is joining us as we prepare for the inspection of the troops. Gabe, a long-time UK tradition, but for the first time here in the U.S., this so-called pass-in review.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Look, it is an amazing, amazing ceremony and really an amazing visit. When you think about it, despite how close this U.S.-UK relationship has been, not that many monarchs have done full UK or full state visits, but it's a hot ticket here in Washington. We have several, not just political dignitaries in attendance there, but from outside the political world. We understand, according to pool reports, that Apple's Tim Cook is in the crowd, the CEO of NVIDIA. Jensen Huang is also in the crowd, as well as other political leaders. You see right there King Charles being led around by President Trump, the King shaking the hands of top Trump administration officials, and now the President and the King walking around the crowd. You can see all those members just trying to crane their necks, trying to get any picture as close as they can to the King. So highly anticipated before he delivers his message to the joint session of Congress later on today, which, as you heard Ryan describe, many staffers there on the Hill, as well as members of Congress themselves, eager to get a glimpse of the monarch, Hallie.
Hundreds of people there on the South Lawn and some 500 troops from all 6 service branches as part of this inspection, if you will. Monica Alba is with us, too, watching from the other side of the White House here. Monica, this historic moment unfolding on the South Lawn.
Absolutely historic, Hallie. And as we talk about the amount of people who are on the South Lawn for a visit like this, many of those high-profile officials, members of the cabinet, certainly the president and first lady, the vice president, the second lady, many of whom were together just a couple of days ago at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, when, of course, those shots were fired above and outside the ballroom where they were. But in terms of the security that is required for an event like this one, that is something that the White House complex is familiar with, does every single day in terms of the protection. But we have an added security perimeter, certainly for the royals themselves, for King Charles and Queen Camilla, who are staying at nearby Blair House, which is just across the way from the North Lawn of the White House. And so you already have this expanded security perimeter and presence that would have taken place regardless of the events of the weekend. But certainly, given that that took place, we know that there was a meeting yesterday here at the White House led by the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, who is in attendance here today for this ceremony, and the head of the Secret Service, the head of DHS, and others, Park Police, everyone involved in the president's protection. And we know that they started to discuss and analyze and look at whether anything needed to change. And in terms of this particular state visit for the royals, we were told everything is proceeding as planned. Certainly what you're seeing here on the South Lawn seems to be going according to the plan that we expected, again, before the security incident at the Washington Hilton on Saturday. But it certainly seems to be top of mind and something likely that the president, the first lady, the king and queen probably touched on and may continue to touch on as we see the president approach the podium here.
He'll deliver some remarks and we will listen in. Monica, thank you. Let's listen to President Trump here at the White House with the King and Queen of England, King Charles, Queen Camilla, the president taking it all in, the First Lady seated beside him as well. And a reminder, this is all happening before he will sit down with the King for their discussion behind closed doors inside the White House as well, as the president takes in the sights and sounds now of the troops in front of him on the lawn. The Army Fife and Drum Corps there with some songs that will be familiar to school kids, I imagine, across America here. We expect to hear a bit more from them and others, and then remarks from President Trump. We'll take you back to the ceremony here so you can listen in as you see the events unfold.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Thank you very much, everybody. What a beautiful British day this is. And it really is. Your Majesties, members of the British delegation, friends, service members, and distinguished guests, welcome to the beautiful White House. Great honor to have you. Melania and I will never forget the spectacular honor Your Majesties showed us during our extraordinary visit to Windsor Castle last September. Now it is our tremendous privilege to host you, and you're going to have a wonderful short stay, but stay nevertheless. Then you're going over to Congress, and you're going to make a speech that's going to make everybody very envious of that beautiful accent of yours. Very elegant. He's a very elegant man. Here in the shadows of monuments to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, honoring the British King might seem an ironic beginning to our celebration of 250 years of American independence. But in fact, no tribute could be more appropriate. Long before Americans had a nation or a constitution, we first had a culture, a character, and a creed. Before we ever proclaimed our independence, Americans carried within us the rarest of gifts, moral courage, and it came from a small but mighty kingdom from across the sea. For nearly 2 centuries before the Revolution, this land was settled and forged by men, women who bore in their souls the blood and noble spirit of the British. Here on a wild and untamed continent, they set loose the ancient English love of liberty and the Great Britain's distinctive sense of glory, destiny, and pride. And that's what it is: glory, destiny, and pride. The American patriots who pledged their lives to independence in 1776 were the heirs to this majestic inheritance. Their veins ran with Anglo-Saxon courage. Their hearts beat with an English faith in standing firm for what is right, good, and true. In recent years, we've often heard it said that America is merely an idea, but the cause of freedom did not simply appear as an intellectual invention of 1776. The American founding was the culmination of hundreds of years of thought, struggle, sweat, blood, and sacrifice on both sides of the Atlantic. Fate drew a long arc from the meadow at Runnymede to the streets of Philadelphia that ran through the lives of people born and bred on the British code that no man should be denied either justice or right. American patriots today can sing "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty," only because our colonial ancestors first sang, "God save the King." We see today a living symbol of this centuries-old bond, just a few dozen feet to the left where I stand. There, Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, an incredible woman who I had the privilege of getting to know. Queen Elizabeth II, very, very special woman who is very greatly missed on both sides of that mighty Atlantic. Long ago planted a young tree. It was a very young and beautiful tree, and look at it now. It's tripled in size and tripled in strength, very much as our nations have even more than tripled. Like our nation itself, it was laid with British hands but grew in American soil. Today it stands tall and proud, reaching ever higher. And this morning it reminds us that the mightiest of trees, like the greatest of nations, must be anchored by the strongest and deepest of roots. In the centuries since we won our independence, Americans have had no closer friends than the British. We share that same root. We speak the same language. We hold the same values. And together our warriors have defended the same extraordinary civilization under twin banners of red, white, and blue. My wonderful mother, Mary MacLeod, was born in Stornoway, Scotland, the Hebrides, and that's what they call very serious Scotland. There's no question about it. Some places they say, well, it wasn't really Scotland. The Hebrides, that's real serious Scotland. That's where they had their greatest of warriors, their greatest of warriors. She came to America at 19, met my incredible father. We loved him so much. We all loved him. We loved her. We loved him, Fred, and they were married for 63 years. And excuse me if you don't mind. That's a record we won't be able to match, darling. I'm sorry. Just not going to work out that way. We'll do well, but we're not going to do that well. 63 years. And my mother, I just see it so clearly. She loved, and I told the king this, she loved the royal family, and she loved the Queen. And anytime the Queen was involved in a ceremony or anything, my mother would be glued to the television, and she'd say, look, Donald, look how beautiful that is. She really did love the family, but I also remember her saying very clearly, Charles, look, young Charles, he's so cute. It's my mother. My mother had a crush on Charles. Can you believe it? Amazing how, I wonder what she's thinking right now. But beneath those beautiful flags, 8 decades ago, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin Roosevelt famously met on a ship in the North Atlantic to outline a vision for the free world after World War II. That understanding of our nation's unique bond and role in history is the essence of our special relationship, and we hope it will always remain that way. The ship where the two great leaders met was called the Prince of Wales, the very title that His Majesty the King held longer than any other individual in British history, and he held it with great pride and respect. It's said that when Prime Minister Churchill first met this future king many decades ago, he was so impressed, he made the statement, he is so young to think so much and so well. And the bust of your great Prime Minister rests proudly again in the Oval Office. We're very proud to bring it back. We brought it back. Throughout His Majesty's life, the world has witnessed that same thoughtfulness which first struck Britain's greatest Prime Minister. His Majesty's intellect, passion, and devotion have been really a blessing to the British people, but not only to his own country, but to the cherished bond between the United States and the United Kingdom. And I am very certain that it will continue that way long into the future. In a few hours, His Majesty will stand in the heart of the United States Capitol as the very first British king ever to address a joint session of the United States Congress. So he's going to be addressing Congress, and I'm going to be watching. I was thinking of going, but they said, I don't know, that might be a step too far. I would love to go. It's not supposed to be protocol, but I would love to be with you. But there, the direct descendant of King George III will speak to the direct successor of the very body that gathered in Independence Hall on July 4th, 1776. If John Adams and George Washington or the King's fifth great-grandfather could see that sight, they might be absolutely shocked, but probably only for a moment. Surely they would be delighted that the wounds of war healed into the most cherished friendship. Think of that very, very long ago difficult war, and yet those wounds did indeed heal into the most cherished of friendships, most cherished. They would be moved beyond words to know that the soldiers who once called each other Redcoats and Yankees became the Tommies and the GIs who together saved the free world as brothers in arms and brothers in eternity, and nobody fought better together than us. If they could see us today, our ancestors would surely be filled with awe and pride that the Anglo-American Revolution in human freedom was never, ever extinguished, but carried forward across centuries, across oceans, and across history until it became a fire that lit the entire world. So today we look back on 250 years. Let us remember what has made our countries the two most exceptional nations the world has ever known. And together let us go forward with even stronger resolve to carry on our sacred devotion to liberty and to the traditions of excellence that have been our shared gift of all mankind. Your Majesties, thank you once again for making this important visit. We are so honored. May God forever bless the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
President Trump there with his remarks on the South Lawn as he shakes the hand of King Charles. As you heard the president highlight the friendship, his hopes for this long-standing special relationship, but also getting personal. This is a personal moment for him, referencing his mother. The president has said publicly before that one of his earliest memories was watching the Queen's coronation when he was a child. Gabe Gutierrez is with us now. And then that moment, you had to wonder what was going through the King's mind when the president joked about his mom thinking that the King was kind of a cutie pie, Gabe.
It was quite the personal anecdote, Hallie. Something we're not used to hearing from President Trump, but he clearly had very fond memories of that, as you mentioned, calling the King a very elegant man, joking off the top that it was a beautifully British day, and no doubt referencing the dreary, rainy morning that we've had here in Washington. Yes, a very personal story of his mother's affection for the Queen, but also having that crush on King Charles. And, you know, Hallie, to be a fly on the wall for this bilateral meeting that we're expecting in just a little bit. We're expecting to have a gift exchange between the First Lady and the royals, but then this bilateral meeting where there will be discussions with King Charles and President Trump. Earlier today, the president posting on social media, reposting this article in a British tabloid, the Daily Mail, that seemed to suggest that a genealogist had looked into the family history of President Trump and that he may have been a distant cousin of King Charles. Whether or not that's true, President Trump loves, of course, a good headline and any ties to the royal family, and so he amplified that, said he would actually be talking with King Charles about that in just a short time. But this is clearly something the president has been looking forward to, the pomp, the circumstance. He loves these types of ceremonies, and now this incredible picture with the royal couple and the president and first lady standing there taking it all in, Hallie.
The balcony of the South Portico there as they take in the pass in review. Some 500 members of the U.S. military from all 6 military branches, including, as we noted earlier, for the first time, the Space Force. After this, they'll go inside for that meeting Gabe mentioned, along with a traditional gift exchange. And Monica Albo, we have seen this before in other contexts in the UK, for example, the king gifting the president just last year the Union flag that flew on the day of the president's second inauguration.
Exactly, Hallie, and there will be a series of gift exchanges, and there are some that are meant to be perhaps more personal and others that end up becoming a bit more public. And from here, the couples are also going to split off and do their own events. We're going to see the king and the president head to the Oval Office for a meeting, and then the Queen and the First Lady are going to go meet with some students in the tennis pavilion, which is an area that the First Lady oversaw the construction and renovation of during their first term in office. And students there are actually going to be using some virtual reality headsets and AI-enabled glasses, we understand, to learn about and discuss both American history and British history and where the two, of course, intertwine so importantly. And they are also going to be shown some artifacts, we understand, from the White House special collection and the National Archives. So the two will have that opportunity while the king and the president meet. And then from there, there will be a little bit of a break in the action before they come back to the White House tonight for that very formal state banquet that, again, is going to take place in the East Room. It's not going to take place in any kind of ballroom because that has not been built yet. But the president will likely speak to that he wishes there had been a venue where he could have hosted them in that manner. That's something he publicly references and frequently talks about. And then from here, you're going to see King Charles and Queen Camilla continue their tour in New York, where they will be traveling to the site of the 9/11 attacks, and they will be meeting specifically and briefly with New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani at that 9/11 memorial event, marking what will be the upcoming 25th anniversary of the terrorist attack. So they will spend some time in New York. They will also be sure to highlight the sort of business and financial ties between New York and the UK. And then they're going to be heading to Virginia, where they're going to attend an America 250 block party to mark that upcoming anniversary of America's independence. And they're also going to be taking in, it seems, a visit specifically related to a horse race in Shenandoah that marks more of a cultural appreciation that they have for that they will be shown, since they, of course, are going to highlight and typically do in the UK their work with the horse racing industry and that long-term connection with the British sport. Hallie.
Monica, thank you. Let me bring in Aaron Hill, a senior Royals editor for People. And Aaron, with that busy schedule for the King and Queen over the next couple of days in the United States, there is one notable omission: no meeting with Prince Harry, who, of course, lives in the U.S.
Yeah, that was definitely the question on a lot of people's minds when it was first announced that King Charles was coming over here, where his son now lives, of course, over in California. But when you're talking about a state visit, every minute is accounted for. And the king is doing this on behalf of the UK government and not himself. So sources are telling people that Harry would not be expected to press for a meeting under those circumstances, and that there's an understanding on both sides. So Harry knows how things are. He wouldn't ask for that either under these circumstances. So there's no room for a father-son reunion here in America.
And what is your sense of the king's reputation here in the U.S.?
You know, I think that there was such love, of course, for his mother, and I think there's a lot of curiosity of King Charles now in his reign, and there's of course so much going on with the royal family back in the UK. So he's, you know, with the family rifts, and of course with the fallout from his brother. So he's trying to, you know, show a moment of stability, not only for the relationship between the two countries, but for his own monarchy back at home.
Aaron Hill. Aaron, thank you. Let me go to Ryan Nobles, who is watching the next stop once the king leaves the White House, and that is at the Capitol, where Ryan, he'll deliver that joint address. You heard the president reference it there in his remarks, saying he'd love to be there for the address to the joint session of Congress, but has been advised that wouldn't really be possible in this instance.
Yeah, that's right. We do not expect to see the president in the chamber when this speech takes place, but we do expect to see a number of American dignitaries, including the vice president, who does expect to be on the dais behind the king, much like he would be during a State of the Union. And we also expect a packed House of members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat. It'll be interesting to watch the optics play out, Hallie, in kind of the protocol that falls in line when dealing with a monarch. The last time that Queen Elizabeth was here to give remarks, King Charles's mother, back in 1991, when she came down, yeah, there's the flyover, when she came down the middle of the chamber for her initial entrance into the chamber, remember during a State of the Union, the members of Congress clamored to shake the president's hand. No one attempted to shake the Queen's hand during that period of time because that was considered to be against protocol. It'll be interesting to see if the same plays out with the king here today. He generally will shake hands with folks depending on the situation and the setting. But I'm sure that there's been guidance given to these members of Congress as to how to behave when the king enters the chamber later today.
You'd see the king, the queen, the first lady, and the president walking into the White House for a series of events there before they head up to the Capitol where Ryan is. Garrett Haake is back on the South Lawn. We saw that moment, Garrett. 4 F-35s, a lot to see, a lot to hear during this arrival ceremony.
Yeah, that's right. As the crowd was just starting to break up here, the folks who were still on the lawn treated to that flyover, those 4 F-35s. A nice capstone to this event with the White House staff now urging us to clear the lawn. The events outside here, Hallie, are over. But I think from the White House's perspective, it went off without a hitch.
Duly noted, Garrett. I can imagine that you are being ushered out. I'll let you go. Let me go back now to Danielle Hamamdjian, who's live for us in London. And Danielle, we've talked about the pageantry, and there has been so much of it over the course of the last 45 minutes or so. Typically, on a visit like this, the monarch would not be tasked with the nuts and bolts of diplomacy. But in this instance, the king is looking to try to smooth over the relationship between the U.S. and the U.K. that's developed, given the tensions between the president and the prime minister where you are.
I mean, this is kind of a regular Tuesday for the king. The pomp, the pageantry, the posing, the small talk. He's had a lifetime of training. He is an expert at this. I'm not inside his inner circle. Nobody is here, but I think it is safe to say that is the easy bit. The tricky bit will be the address to Congress and striking the right tone. Now, we are told by an official at Buckingham Palace that this speech is going to last about 20 minutes. The message itself will have come from the UK government, but the language and the tone, that is all the king. What he's going to convey is that at a time of deep divisions, he'll talk about unity, about their shared democratic values. He'll talk about over the 250 years that the relationship is a story of reconciliation and renewal, an acknowledgement there, I think, of recent disagreements between both countries. Of course, his mother was the first British monarch to address Congress. That was back in 1991. I actually went back earlier today to watch her address to Congress. A few things stood out at me, Hallie. She talked about the best progress is made when Europeans and Americans work in concert. And she also said at the time, stability depends on tolerance and understanding between different communities. That was the late Queen Elizabeth back in 1991. We'll wait and see what the current King Charles has to say in his address to Congress in just a few hours. Hallie.
And worth noting that he's doing this series of traveling here in the U.S. as he's been recovering from health issues of his own. Gabe Gutierrez remains with us now, Gabe, as we know that the notables, the principals, are in the Blue Room now at the White House for the gift exchange. They'll have the sit down in a couple of minutes here, and then we'll see them again later in Washington. You mentioned earlier you'd love to be a fly on the wall. I think many people would as they look at this relationship that has developed between the king and the president.
Yeah, certainly. Look, Hallie, the king does not negotiate policy, but this meeting, this bilateral meeting, so much about tone, so much about relationships. Would be curious to know if he brings up, the president's comments at all, or speaks about the Royal Navy, which, of course, King Charles served in as well. But, of course, we won't be privy to those conversations, but we'll be looking later on today as the king makes his way to Capitol Hill, what he chooses to focus on during that address, Hallie.
A big day in Washington, a taste of London, if you will, here in the nation's capital. And we will have much more coverage throughout the day right here on NBC News. For now, that does it for our special report. But we will be back this afternoon with live coverage of that address to Congress. Of course, much more on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap up tonight on Nightly News. For all of us here at NBC, thanks for watching.